My name is Johan Norberg, a writer and an analyst, and I was born and raised here in Sweden. I was 3 years old when the Nobel Prize in Economics was awarded to Milton Friedman, here in Stockholm. Milton Friedman did a lot more than win the Nobel Prize in Stockholm. He had a thought-provoking message that won him thousands of advocates and opponents all over the world. In 2002, I had the pleasure of meeting Professor Friedman, and the thing that struck me was his intellectual curiosity. His research led him to believe in the power of free markets and economic freedom, while many people today place a greater emphasis on government safety nets and greater financial equality. I'll travel in some of Milton Friedman's footsteps and revisit his ideas on the struggle between freedom and equality. I was born and raised in Sweden, and my country has made an effort to make people's lives more equal. To reduce differences of outcome, we tax heavily and redistribute wealth among our citizens. And many people in the United States advocate a system like ours. If, on the other hand, the government gives everybody the same freedom to work and reap the rewards, some will do better than others. The result will be equality of opportunity, but not equality of outcome. Here in the United States, you've accepted more inequality of outcome. And over the past 30 years, a debate has been raging between these two competing alternatives. Can we live with economic freedom, even though it doesn't guarantee a specific result? Even though it's built on the ongoing destruction of old ideas and businesses that are no longer competitive? Can we accept freedom, even though freedom to choose also means that we will not all be equally successful? Equality is a powerful concept, one that we can all cherish to some degree. In fact, it's fair to say that in one sense, America was built on the idea of equality. Equality is so important that here in Washington, D.C., there is a monument dedicated to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was one of the founding fathers, and he wrote the American Declaration of Independence with these words: "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness."
What did Thomas Jefferson mean by the words, "all men are created equal"?
What he meant by the words equal can be seen in the phrase endowed by their Creator. To Thomas Jefferson, all men are equal in the eyes of God. They all must be treated as individuals who have, each separately, a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Of course, practice did not conform to the ideals in Jefferson's life or in ours as a nation. He agonized repeatedly during his lifetime about the conflict between the institution of slavery and the fine words of the Declaration. Yet, during his whole life, he was a slave owner.
But during the 19th century, the powerful words and ideals of the Declaration of Independence helped more people to see the horrors of slavery, and it helped to end forced labor. Practice began to catch up with the ideals.
The idea of equality came more and more to mean that everyone should have the same opportunity to make what he could of his capacities. That all careers should be open to people on the basis of their talents, independently of the race or religion or belief or social class that characterized them. This concept of equality of opportunity offers no conflict at all with the concept of freedom. On the contrary, they reinforce one another, and it is no doubt the concept that even today is most widely held.
But during the 20th century, as people were confronted with some of the differences of outcome that were the result of free markets, a very different ideal began to emerge. And Friedman thought that this ideal was in conflict with freedom.
That is the ideal, that everyone should be equal in income, in level of living, in what he has.
The idea that the economic race should be so arranged that everybody ends at the finish line at the same time, rather than that everyone starts at the beginning line at the same time. This concept raises a very serious problem for freedom. It is clearly in conflict with it, since it requires that the freedom of some be restricted in order to provide greater benefits to others.
How did the idea that governments should change economic outcomes become popular in the West? In a way, it started here in 1929 when the stock market crashed.
The Wall Street crash was followed by the worst depression in American history. That depression has been blamed on the failure of capitalism. It was no such thing, but the myth lives on.
Friedman thought that the Great Depression was the result of massive government failure, of stupid monetary policies and tariffs that created a trade war. But the common interpretation at the time was that capitalism had failed and that you couldn't just leave things for themselves in the face of massive unemployment and widespread poverty. So politicians worldwide were looking for a new approach.
Roosevelt's first priority after his election was to deal with massive unemployment. A public works program was started. The government financed projects to build highways, bridges, and dams. Roosevelt wanted to see America move into a new era. The Social Security Act was passed and other measures followed: unemployment benefits, welfare payments, distribution of surplus food. With these measures, of course, came rules, regulations, and red tape, as familiar today as they were novel then. The government bureaucracy began to grow, and it's been growing ever since.
The United States became a bit more like European countries, like my home country, Sweden, by introducing some wealth redistribution and more government control over the economy. My country has made an effort to make people's lives more equal. We have relatively free markets in business. It's fairly easy to start a company and compete without being stopped by licenses, regulations, and tariffs. But when people are allowed to compete freely, some win and make a lot of money. Some lose and they lag behind. That's when the Swedish government steps in. To reduce differences of outcome, we tax heavily and redistribute wealth among our citizens. To many, this is the best of both worlds, since we don't really have equal chances in life. Some people have parents who give them an interest in learning, ambition and opportunities. Some don't. Some are lucky in the genetic lottery and some aren't. Some have good health and some don't. To reduce the gaps that such differences might lead to, our government steps in. Sweden chose to make equality a priority in the 1970s, when we were already one of the richest countries in the world. Taxes were raised and benefit systems were made more generous. Public spending almost doubled between 1960 and 1980, from 31% to 60% of GDP. Some would say that this has made our country better, but it has also reduced the rewards for working hard and taking risks. This is a museum recreation of the original workshop of Lars Magnus Ericsson. He was a very important person in Swedish history because more than 130 years ago, he produced cheap and reliable versions of the telephones that he had seen in the United States. And because of this, Stockholm became a global center for telecommunication in the late 19th century, and it laid the groundwork for one of Sweden's most successful companies, Ericsson. And today, it still employs more than 80,000 people in 150 countries. This should make me proud as a Swede, but in fact it makes me a bit worried, because almost all big Swedish businesses share Ericsson's heritage, and they probably all had boardrooms that looked a bit like this. The average big Swedish company is 94 years old. We have apparently not had the policies that encourage people to start the new businesses that might become tomorrow's Ericsson. Today, Swedish entrepreneurs are the oldest in the world. This is the other side of the coin. The young people and the immigrants who should be our future are not starting the new Ericssons. In fact, we have many examples of young Swedes and entrepreneurial immigrants who move from Sweden to Britain or the United States because the rewards are much greater there, where taxes are lower. In many suburbs like this outside of Stockholm, the unemployment rate is higher than 50%. Even in the midst of the economic boom, almost a quarter of the working age population in Sweden did not go to work in the morning, but got their checks from the government. It does seem to support the view that economic incentives matter. With a sickness benefit of up to 80% of your income, perhaps it wasn't surprising that Swedes were off sick more than any other people, even though we objectively were healthier than almost any other population. In 2004, sickness benefits absorbed 16% of the government's budget. These statistics have improved since, but interestingly, only after a determined effort by the government to reduce the equality of income, by lowering taxes and making benefit systems less generous. So it seems that these changes increase the incentives to work. Friedman emphasized something counterintuitive. There's a positive benefit to inequality of outcome for everybody. Some people become millionaires and some become billionaires, but that is because they were the ones who made their customers happy.
That's the economic system that has transformed our society in the past century and more. That's what gave the Henry Fords, the Thomas Alva Edisons, the incentives to produce the miracles that have benefited us all. They went in with their eyes open. They knew what they were doing. And win or lose, we, society, benefited from their willingness to take a chance.
If we did not allow a Lars Magnus Ericsson, a Thomas Edison, or a Bill Gates to become incredibly rich, we would be more equal. But Friedman would ask, would we be better off? If entrepreneurs did not think that a possible reward for all the sacrifices they make, all their hard work, all the risk they take, is a lot of wealth, then they might do something else instead. And in that case, we would not have the goods and the services and technologies that make our lives better. Equality, freedom. If you are going to limit people's freedoms in order to make them more equal, how much freedom do you take away? If you use the government to take from some and give to others, how do you decide what to take and from whom? And who do you give it to? Can this be done without leading to the loss of all freedom? Or can freedom lead to more equality? As Milton Friedman put it in 1980, the society that puts equality before freedom will end up with neither. The society that puts freedom before equality will end up with a great measure of both.